Welcome back. The meeting between congressional leaders and the White House just wrapped up. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson just spoke to reporters saying that the border remained his conference's top priority. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said there was wide-scale agreement in the importance of addressing the issue of aid to Ukraine and the border, and sounded a bit more optimistic about the state of the talks. I'm joined now by Congressman Gregory Meeks, ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, who just walked out of that meeting. So thank you so much for joining us. So how productive was today's meeting?
Well, I think it was a good conversation, and of course the devil's in the details and what takes place next. I think it was basically an agreement that folks had around the table, understanding the significance and the importance of funding for Ukraine and funding for Taiwan, funding for Israel and humanitarian aid, as well as the border. The devil is in the details, though, going back, and that. So I think that where we ultimately ended up was that we must do both. Border security and Ukraine in a bipartisan way. And so I hope that the House majority joins the Senate in the negotiations. And we were told that we expect the Senate is very close to coming up to some agreement. And so we wait and see what happens there. But I think that was something that was clear. The Senate is getting close in a bipartisan way to come up with a deal that they hope will get to us and bring it over to the House within the next week or two.
We said that it sounds like there's something coming close. I want to talk to you specifically. Take us into the meeting. What was the mood among Republicans in particular?
Well, I think that, especially with Speaker Johnson, his thing was, the border. But I think that as we went around the room, that there was an agreement of the significance and the importance of Ukraine so that we could make sure that Putin doesn't win. And so folks acknowledged that. But also there was with the Speaker and many of the Republicans, especially on the House side, saying that they didn't think that they could do anything without the border. But in the room, I don't think anybody said do anything without the border. There was a consensus that we had to do something on the border, but we have to do Ukraine, and we have to do it in a timely fashion. So it was, Democrats and Republicans having an open and I think honest conversation about it. And ultimately, I think that we'll see what if, or when, I should say, the Senate comes up with the bill that they have been negotiating in a bipartisan manner, and hopefully we can get something done in which no one's going to get everything that they wanted.
Well, Congressman, are you more confident now that you've been in that meeting, that you saw the way Republicans and Democrats were talking to you? Are you more confident now that an agreement can be reached on this supplemental aid?
Well, I'm more confident now that the Senate will have an agreement in a bipartisan way. I'm still a little bit, to be quite honest with you, concerned about what we will do on the House, because I've seen how a number of the Republicans do not want to move unless we're just talking about H.R. 2. And I don't think that we're going to have an agreement if they continue to take that position. If they move from that and we have some actual conversation and dialogue, because there's some things that are very important to Democrats also as it pertains to the border, then I think that then I would be more optimistic. So I'm optimistic that the Senate is going to do something. I'm still waiting to see, or still somewhat pessimistic about what happens on the House side. I would hope that they would move from just H.R. 2 and the draconian bill that they were putting forward, and there will be give and take and an honest conversation between the House majority along with the House minority, and then work closely with the Senate.
And Senator Schumer said that there were some people in the room in that meeting that you just walked out of that said that lawmakers needed to do the border first. What is your sense of that?
Well, I think that and Senator Schumer said in the end of the meeting, and I agree with him, that listening to the meeting, it can't be the border first. And apparently, and to one degree, I feel that they're holding Ukraine hostage to the border. So we've got to do both at the same time. It can't be one without the other. And I think that then becomes where we move past the impasse. And I think that's what the Senate is going to do. The Senate is going to come out with a bill that does both. Does something on the border and does something and gives funding to Ukraine. Basically, what the president had been asking for is just that, because he put out 4 things for the supplemental. But we can't do one, say, to do border without Ukraine or vice versa. We got to do both collectively.
Are you glad that the president got involved? And take us through what the president was saying in the room, how effective he was in there.
Well, the president showed his vast foreign relations and foreign policy experience, how he has kept the world together, quite frankly. When you look at what he's done with our European allies, they are stronger now. NATO is stronger now than it's ever been, primarily because of the work and the expertise of the president. When you look at also the work that he's done with South Korea and Japan and what they're doing to contribute and help Ukraine is really important. So I think that it was important for the president, his expertise that he has from the experience that he has now as president, as vice president, as the former chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That was tremendously important.
He has a lot of experience, as we know, on foreign affairs. Thank you so much, Congressman Gregory Meeks.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.